In 1911, a young Russian composer named Alexander Scriabin walked into a Vienna concert hall and stopped the entire orchestra mid-rehearsal. He pointed at the violinist and said, "You're playing C-sharp, but you're wearing the wrong color. C-sharp is violet, not brown." The musicians exchanged confused glances. Scriabin wasn't joking. He possessed a rare neurological condition called synesthesia, where sensory experiences blend together. But here's what shocked the neurological community. When scientists finally studied his brain decades later, they discovered something profound. Scriabin hadn't just been born different. His perception had evolved through deliberate practice, meditation, and consciousness expansion techniques he'd learned from mystical traditions. What disturbed conventional psychology even more was this discovery. The boundary between normal perception and heightened awareness wasn't as fixed as we believed. Dr. David Eagleman at Stanford later proved that anyone's brain could develop enhanced perceptual abilities under the right conditions. Scriabin had essentially rewired his neural pathways to experience reality in dimensions most people never access. He saw connections others missed, felt patterns others couldn't detect, and created music that seemed to bypass the conscious mind entirely. But the most revolutionary part? The 8 specific signs that indicated his transformed perception weren't unique to synesthesia. They appeared in mystics, quantum physicists, indigenous shamans, and psychological masters across every culture. These signs suggested something extraordinary. There exists a spectrum of human perception, and most of humanity operates at only the baseline level, completely unaware that other frequencies of reality are available to them. If you've ever felt that you experience life slightly differently than others around you, if you've sensed patterns that no one else seems to notice, if you've had moments where time felt elastic or emotions seemed to have color, then you're already accessing these expanded perceptual states. The difference is, you probably dismissed these experiences as imagination or anomalies. What we're about to explore isn't mysticism disconnected from science. It's the cutting edge of perceptual psychology, backed by neuroscience research from institutions like MIT, Stanford, and the Max Planck Institute. The 8 signs we'll examine are measurable, developable, and accessible to anyone willing to understand how perception actually works. Here's the uncomfortable truth modern psychology rarely acknowledges. Your perception of reality is not objective. It's a highly filtered, culturally conditioned interpretation created by your brain's prediction algorithms. But those algorithms can be reprogrammed. The people who see reality differently aren't supernatural. They've simply learned to adjust the perceptual filters that most humans never question. Pattern recognition amplification. People with expanded perception don't just see patterns. They see meta-patterns, the patterns that connect seemingly unrelated patterns. Dr. Carl Jung noticed this in his most psychologically advanced patients. They would walk into a room and instantly sense the emotional dynamics, the power structures, the unspoken tensions, not through conscious analysis, but through instantaneous holistic perception. Here's the neuroscience. Your brain processes 11 million bits of information per second, but your conscious awareness can only handle about 40 bits. That means 99.999% of reality is being filtered out before it reaches your awareness. Normal perception operates like a narrow spotlight. Enhanced perception works more like stadium floodlights, illuminating connections your filtering system usually discards. Consider Maria, a corporate strategist who consulted for Fortune 500 companies. While other analysts needed weeks to understand market dynamics, she could predict competitive movements within hours of entering a company's headquarters. When researchers studied her process, they discovered she wasn't consciously analyzing data. Her brain had learned to detect micro patterns in how people arranged their offices, the specific language executives used in casual conversation, the hesitation patterns in financial presentations. She was processing information most business analysts literally couldn't see because their perceptual filters had been trained to ignore everything except spreadsheet data. You can train this ability through perceptual expansion meditation. Spend 15 minutes daily in a complex environment, a busy cafe, a nature trail, an office. Don't focus on anything specific. Instead, soften your attention and allow your peripheral awareness to capture everything simultaneously. Your brain will initially resist this because it violates your normal filtering protocols. Push through that resistance. Within 90 days, you'll start noticing patterns you previously missed. Body language microexpressions, environmental energy shifts, synchronicities between seemingly random events. But here's the critical nuance. This isn't about becoming hypervigilant or paranoid. It's about accessing the fuller spectrum of information that's always been there, filtered out by social conditioning that taught you to narrow your focus. Temporal elasticity experience. Those who perceive reality differently report a radically different experience of time. Not metaphorically different, measurably different. Dr. David Eagleman's research at Baylor College of Medicine proved that subjective time perception can vary by factors of 3 to 5 depending on neurological state. But what his published papers didn't emphasize was the most startling finding. People can learn to consciously control this temporal flexibility. Einstein famously said that time is relative, but most people think he only meant this in cosmic physics terms. He was also describing human perception. When you're in flow state, 3 hours pass like 30 minutes. When you're in trauma, 3 seconds stretch into eternity. These aren't just feelings. Brain imaging shows that different regions of the prefrontal cortex literally process temporal information at different rates depending on your perceptual state. The ancient meditation masters knew this. In Tibetan Buddhism, advanced practitioners describe entering states where a single moment of meditation contains what feels like hours of insight. Western psychology dismissed this as subjective distortion until neuroscientist Richie Davidson measured the brain activity of Mathieu Ricard, a French molecular biologist turned Buddhist monk. During deep meditation, Ricard's brain showed gamma-wave activity at levels never before recorded in laboratory settings. Time hadn't actually slowed, but his perception was processing exponentially more information per objective second. Here's where it becomes practical. People with expanded perception can access this temporal elasticity in daily life. They experience what researchers call chronoception flexibility. In crisis moments, everything slows down, giving them more processing time. In creative flow, hours vanish as they access accelerated productivity states. In deep presence with loved ones, ordinary moments become infinitely rich. You can develop this through moment multiplication. Set a timer for 60 seconds. Close your eyes and count your breaths while noticing every sensation you can detect. The texture of air entering your nostrils, the micro movements in your chest, the pressure points where your body contacts the chair, the ambient sounds at different distances, the subtle thoughts arising and dissolving. Most people detect 10 to 15 distinct experiences in 60 seconds. With practice, you can perceive hundreds. You're not creating new experiences. You're removing the temporal compression filter that normally collapses dozens of perceptions into vague chunks. Imagine experiencing twice as much richness in the same amount of clock time. That's not about productivity hacking. It's about actually living more by perceiving more. Synesthetic crossover ability. You don't need to be born with synesthesia to experience reality synesthetically. This is perhaps the most suppressed discovery in perceptual psychology. Dr. Vilayana Ramachandran at UC San Diego proved that all human brains have the neural architecture for cross-modal perception. The connections between your sensory processing centers don't disappear after childhood. They just get inhibited by social conditioning that insists each sense should stay in its lane. But people with expanded perception maintain or reactivate these connections. They taste emotions, see sound textures, feel colors, hear spatial relationships. Before you dismiss this as flowery language, understand that this is literal neurology. Their brains process information through multiple sensory channels simultaneously, creating a richer, more dimensional experience of reality. Consider James, a financial trader who consistently outperformed algorithmic trading models. When researchers investigated his process, he described feeling market movements as physical sensations in his body. Bullish markets felt like expansion in his chest. Bearish trends created contraction in his stomach. Technical analysts thought he was being metaphorical. Brain imaging revealed he wasn't. His insular cortex, which processes interoceptive body sensations, was firing in sync with his visual cortex when he analyzed market data. His brain had created a synesthetic translation system that converted abstract financial patterns into somatic information his evolutionarily older brain regions could process with survival-level priority. This explains why indigenous trackers can feel where animals are without seeing evidence, why musicians like Scrabian composed in colors, why certain therapists can sense their clients' emotional states with uncanny accuracy. They're processing information through channels most modern humans have learned to suppress. Choose a non-visual input like music or ambient sound. Close your eyes and ask, if this sound had a color, what would it be? If it had a texture, how would it feel? If it had a taste, what would that taste be? Your rational mind will protest that you're just making things up, but persist for 30 days and something remarkable happens. Your answers become consistent and automatic. You've reactivated dormant neural pathways. The crucial consideration: this heightened perception can feel overwhelming initially. You need to develop the ability to modulate your sensitivity. Otherwise, you risk sensory overload in stimulating environments. Observation influence capacity. Here's where perception shifts into territory that makes conventional psychology uncomfortable. People with expanded awareness don't just observe social situations differently. Their observation seems to influence the situations themselves. This sounds mystical until you understand the quantum measurement problem translated into human interaction. Werner Heisenberg proved that the act of observation changes quantum particles. Psychologists initially dismissed this as irrelevant to human-scale reality. But social psychologist Robert Rosenthal's work on the observer expectation effect revealed something stunning. Human perception operates on similar principles. When teachers expected certain students to excel, those students did excel, even when the expectations were based on random selection. The observer's perception literally influenced the observed outcome. Dr. Daniel Siegel at UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center took this further. His research on interpersonal neurobiology showed that highly perceptive individuals emit different electromagnetic field patterns from their hearts and brains. When two people interact, their nervous systems synchronize. But people with enhanced perception create stronger synchronization fields. They don't just observe the emotional state of others, they influence those states through their perceptual attention. This explains phenomena that seem supernatural but are actually measurable. Why certain therapists create breakthrough moments through presence alone. Why some leaders inspire without speaking. Why you feel different in the presence of highly conscious individuals. Their enhanced perception creates a resonance field that affects your nervous system. Sarah, a hostage negotiator, embodied this principle. Her success rate was 40% higher than her peers. Psychologists analyzing her recorded negotiations noticed something peculiar. Suspect's physiology measurably shifted within 90 seconds of her focused attention. Heart rate stabilized, breathing deepened, stress hormones decreased. She wasn't using manipulation techniques. Her expanded perception created what neuroscientists call limbic resonance, a nervous system synchronization that occurred through the quality of her attention itself. This isn't about controlling others. It's about recognizing that your perception isn't passive. Observation. When you truly see someone, when you observe them with expanded awareness rather than filtered judgment, you create space for them to shift. Your perception becomes a catalyst. Observe someone without any agenda to change them, understand them, or judge them. Pure observation. Notice how your own nervous system wants to analyze, categorize, react. Keep returning to neutral witnessing. This rewires your default mode network away from reactive perception toward quantum observation that influences through non-interfering presence. But be cautious. This power carries ethical weight. The same perceptual capacity that can help someone feel seen can also be used to manipulate. Your intention matters as much as your attention. Holographic information processing. Normal perception processes information sequentially and locally. Enhanced perception processes information holographically, where each part contains information about the whole. This isn't metaphysics. It's based on Carl Pribram's holonomic brain theory and David Bohm's implicate order physics, both suggesting that reality operates on holographic principles. People accessing this perceptual mode describe experiences that sound impossible. Knowing the entire plot of a situation from a single detail, understanding someone's life story from a brief interaction, sensing global events before they reach the news. Skeptics dismiss this as confirmation bias or pattern matching, but controlled laboratory experiments reveal something more interesting. Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences conducted thousands of trials measuring whether humans can perceive information before it's presented. The data consistently showed small but statistically significant precognition effects, strongest in participants who practiced meditation and reported expanded perceptual experiences. His interpretation: these individuals were accessing information holographically, where temporal sequence becomes less rigid. Michael, an intelligence analyst, demonstrated this capacity practically. Given a single intercepted communication, he could often construct accurate profiles of entire network structures. His method defied normal analytical protocols. He described feeling into the holographic information field surrounding the data point. Neuroscientists studying his brain activity found unusual coherence between distant brain regions, suggesting his neural networks were processing information in parallel distributed patterns rather than linear sequences. This is how indigenous cultures described talking to plants or listening to the land. They weren't being poetic. They were accessing holographic information processing where local elements, a plant, a landscape, a weather pattern, contained information about larger systemic patterns. Choose a small object, a leaf, a photograph, a written paragraph. Instead of analyzing its parts sequentially, soften your focus and try to perceive the entire object simultaneously. Notice relationships between elements rather than elements themselves. What does the space between parts tell you? How does the object's context influence its meaning? Your rational mind will insist this is vague and imprecise, but persistence reveals something remarkable. You start extracting accurate information about contexts you couldn't have consciously known. The leaf tells you about the tree's health, the soil conditions, the seasonal patterns. The photograph reveals relationship dynamics beyond its visual content. The paragraph exposes the writer's emotional state and hidden intentions. You stop needing exhaustive data to understand situations. You develop what ancient traditions called wisdom, the capacity to perceive the whole through mindful attention to the part. Energetic field sensitivity. Modern science largely ignores this sign because it lacks agreed-upon measurement frameworks. But people with expanded perception consistently report sensing energy fields around living beings, emotional atmospheres in spaces, and residual emotional imprints in objects. Before dismissing this as New Age fantasy, consider the measurable physics. Every biological organism generates electromagnetic fields. Your heart produces a field detectable up to 3 feet away. Your brain generates fields extending beyond your skull. These aren't metaphors, they're measurable with standard magnetometers. The HeartMath Institute has published extensive research on heart field coherence and how it influences others' nervous systems. But here's where it gets interesting. Most humans can't consciously detect these fields despite having the sensory equipment. Your skin contains magnetoreceptor cells. Your retinas contain cryptochromes sensitive to magnetic fields. You possess the biological hardware for energetic perception, but cultural conditioning taught you to ignore the signals. People with expanded perception reactivate this sensitivity. Dr. William Tiller, professor emeritus at Stanford, spent decades studying how highly trained meditators could measurably alter pH levels in water and enzyme activity through intention alone. His instruments detected unusual electromagnetic patterns emanating from these practitioners. They weren't just imagining energy fields. They were interacting with measurable forces that most humans don't consciously access. Consider Elena, an emergency room physician with an unusual diagnostic skill. She could often sense which patients needed immediate attention before triage data indicated urgency. Her colleagues called it clinical intuition. Researchers who studied her found she was unconsciously responding to subtle electromagnetic field disruptions in physiologically unstable patients. Her brain had learned to perceive energetic signatures of metabolic distress. You walk into a room and immediately feel whether it's heavy or light. You meet someone and sense an off quality despite their friendly demeanor. You enter a building and feel historical trauma imprinted in the space. These aren't supernatural perceptions. They're your nervous system detecting electromagnetic and biochemical information your conscious mind hasn't been trained to interpret. Stand near a living plant and close your eyes. Slowly move your hand closer and farther from the plant's leaves without touching. Notice any subtle sensations: temperature changes, tingling, pressure, magnetic pull, or repulsion. Most people detect nothing initially because they're filtering for obvious sensations. But if you practice daily for 30 days with patient attention, subtle perceptions emerge. This sensitivity can be destabilizing. You'll start perceiving emotional content in environments and people that social conventions pretend isn't there. You'll sense others' pain, fear, desire, and deception. Without proper grounding practices, this can lead to empathic overwhelm or paranoid hypervigilance. Multi-perspective simultaneity. Perhaps the most powerful sign of expanded perception is the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without collapsing into a single viewpoint. Normal consciousness operates from a single reference point, your ego's position. Enhanced perception allows you to experience reality from multiple reference points at once. This sounds abstract until you understand the neurology. Dr. V.S. Ramachandran's research on mirror neurons revealed that your brain simulates others' experiences by internally recreating their neural patterns. Most people can do this sequentially, imagining how someone else feels. But people with expanded perception do this simultaneously, holding their own perspective and multiple others' perspectives in conscious awareness at the same time. Buddhist psychology calls this rigpa, or pure awareness. Developmental psychology calls it late-stage perspective taking. Quantum physics calls it superposition. The common thread, consciousness isn't limited to single-point observation. It can maintain awareness of multiple states simultaneously. Thomas, a conflict mediator working with international peace negotiations, demonstrated this capacity practically. In meetings with hostile factions, he could simultaneously hold his neutral perspective, understand each party's worldview, sense the ancestral traumas driving their positions, perceive potential future outcomes, and maintain awareness of the room's collective field. He wasn't switching between perspectives rapidly. He was experiencing all of them at once. Brain imaging of experienced meditators shows similar patterns. During states of open awareness, their default mode network, which normally maintains the sense of separate self, shows decreased activity. Simultaneously, other regions associated with empathy, spatial reasoning, and temporal processing show increased connectivity. They're not losing their sense of self. They're expanding it to include multiple experiential positions. This explains phenomena that seem impossible. Knowing what someone will say before they speak, sensing collective mood shifts before they manifest, understanding both sides of conflicts with equal depth, perceiving situations from past and future perspectives simultaneously. In any conversation, practice holding 3 viewpoints: your experience, the other person's experience, and a neutral observer's perspective watching the interaction. Initially, you'll switch between these sequentially, but with consistent practice, something shifts. You begin experiencing all 3 simultaneously. The boundaries between perspectives become permeable rather than rigid. You move beyond the tyranny of single perspective consciousness. You stop being trapped in your ego's limited viewpoint. Conflicts lose their absolute quality because you can genuinely experience validity in opposing positions simultaneously. This isn't moral relativism, it's perceptual sophistication. Consciousness as primary recognition. The final and perhaps most profound sign: people with expanded perception stop experiencing consciousness as something their brain produces. They experience consciousness as the primary reality in which their brain appears. This reversal isn't philosophical speculation. It emerges from direct perceptual experience that contradicts materialist assumptions. Normal perception assumes, I am a body with a brain that generates consciousness. Expanded perception reveals, I am consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing existence through this body-brain system. Dr. Donald Hoffman at UC Irvine has mathematical proofs suggesting that space-time and objects are user interface representations, not fundamental reality. Quantum physicists like John Wheeler propose that consciousness plays an essential role in creating observable reality. Neurologists like Giulio Tonini developed integrated information theory, suggesting consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent. But the real evidence comes from altered states research. Dr. Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins found that people having profound psilocybin experiences consistently reported encounters with consciousness that seemed independent of their personal identity. They described their ordinary self as a localized pattern within a vast field of awareness. Follow-up interviews years later showed this perceptual shift permanently altered how they experienced daily reality. This explains mystical traditions' consistent claims across cultures. The witness consciousness observing your thoughts isn't produced by your thoughts. Pure awareness exists prior to mental content. You are not your thoughts, emotions, or perceptions. You are that which observes them. Rebecca, a neuroscientist, ironically enough, experienced this shift during meditation retreat. She described her sense of being Rebecca suddenly revealing itself as a temporary role consciousness was playing. Her memories, personality, and history remained accessible, but she directly perceived them as content arising within awareness, rather than defining awareness itself. The shift was permanent. Years later, she continues experiencing herself as consciousness temporarily focused through the Rebecca lens, rather than as Rebecca who sometimes experiences consciousness. This isn't about improving yourself, it's about recognizing what you actually are beyond the self-concept. From this recognition, psychological suffering decreases dramatically because you're no longer identified with the temporary patterns of thought and emotion. You experience yourself as the unchanging awareness within which all experience arises and dissolves. Notice that you're aware right now. Notice that this awareness has been present through all the changing contents of your experience. Notice that awareness itself never appears or disappears, only its objects do. Notice that you can be aware of thoughts, but you can also be aware of the space between thoughts. That spacious awareness is more fundamentally you than any psychological content. This recognition can seem to invalidate conventional life concerns. If you're infinite consciousness, why care about mundane responsibilities? The mature response recognizes that consciousness chooses to engage human experience fully while remembering its transcendent nature. You become simultaneously more detached and more engaged, free from desperate attachment yet deeply committed to authentic participation. Integration and development. These 8 signs aren't separate abilities. They're facets of a unified perceptual shift from contracted awareness to expanded consciousness. The transformation follows predictable stages that mirror developmental psychology's higher stages of growth. The first stage is recognition, noticing you already have glimpses of these expanded perceptual capacities. You've experienced moments of pattern recognition, temporal elasticity, synesthetic crossover, quantum observation, holographic processing, energetic sensitivity, multi-perspective awareness, and consciousness primacy. You dismiss them as anomalies. Recognition means acknowledging them as valid data points. The second stage is cultivation, deliberately practicing the development techniques for each sign. Dedicate 90 days to systematic training, 15 minutes daily on perceptual expansion meditation, 10 minutes on moment multiplication, 5 minutes on sensory translation, 10 minutes on witnessing practice, 10 minutes on holographic attention, 5 minutes on field sensitivity, 10 minutes on perspective multiplication, 10 minutes on awareness recognition. That's 75 minutes daily, or you can cycle through different practices on different days. The third stage is integration, noticing how these capacities begin operating automatically in daily life. You're not trying to see patterns anymore. You naturally perceive them. Time elasticity becomes available when needed. Synesthetic information arises spontaneously. Your observation influences situations without deliberate intention. Holographic insights emerge from minimal data. Energetic awareness guides your interactions. Multiple perspectives coexist effortlessly. Consciousness primacy becomes your baseline experience. The fourth stage is stabilization, maintaining expanded perception consistently rather than losing it. Develop this through adversity training. Deliberately practice expanded perception in challenging situations rather than only in meditation. The fifth stage is transmission. At this stage, your expanded perception begins affecting others, not through teaching or technique, but through resonance. Your nervous system coherence influences nearby nervous systems. Your perceptual clarity creates space for others' clarity. You become what esoteric traditions called a field generator, someone whose presence elevates collective consciousness. Expanded perception can create feelings of unreality or dissociation if not properly grounded. Daily practices that engage your physical senses, movement, nature contact, creative expression anchor expanded awareness in embodied experience. These perceptual capacities are morally neutral. They can serve ego inflation or genuine service. The measure of authentic development isn't dramatic experiences or special abilities. It's increased compassion, decreased reactivity, enhanced capacity to be present with suffering, and greater effectiveness in reducing suffering for yourself and others. As you develop expanded perception, you begin recognizing it in others. You discover a hidden network of humans operating at this perceptual frequency across all professions, cultures, and spiritual traditions. You're not special for accessing these capacities. You're simply remembering what humans were always capable of before cultural conditioning narrowed perception to baseline survival mode. Conclusion. Return with me to where we began, to Scribian in that Vienna concert hall, perceiving colors and musical notes. His expanded perception wasn't an aberration. It was a preview of human potential. The 8 signs we've explored aren't supernatural gifts. They're natural capacities suppressed by social conditioning that insists reality must be experienced in narrow, consensus ways. Neuroscience has now proven what mystics always claimed. Your perception creates your experience. Reality, not through wishful thinking or positive affirmations, but through literal neurological processes that filter, interpret, and construct conscious experience from raw sensory data. The revolutionary implications are staggering. If perception is malleable, then reality itself is malleable. Not the objective quantum field underlying experience, but your lived experience of what reality feels like, what it means, how it operates. You're not stuck with baseline human perception. You can develop the perceptual sophistication that transforms ordinary existence into something infinitely richer. But here's the responsibility that comes with this knowledge. You can't unknow what you now understand. the 8 signs will start appearing in your experience. You'll notice patterns you previously missed. Time will feel more elastic. Synesthetic information will arise. Your observation will influence outcomes. Holographic insights will emerge. Energetic sensitivity will awaken. Multiple perspectives will coexist. Consciousness primacy will reveal itself. The question isn't whether this transformation will begin, it's whether you'll have the courage to allow it fully. Because expanded perception doesn't make life simpler, it makes life infinitely more complex, more beautiful, more challenging, more meaningful. You'll perceive suffering you previously ignored. You'll sense potential you previously couldn't imagine. You'll recognize responsibility you previously denied. This is the path of those who see reality differently, not because they're special, but because they chose to stop filtering experience through socially sanctioned perceptual limitations. They chose to remember that human consciousness is far vaster, far more capable, far more mysterious than consensus reality permits. Choose one of the 8 signs. Practice its development technique for 30 days. Notice what changes in your perception. Then ask yourself, what else have I been taught to ignore that might reveal dimensions of reality I've never questioned? You are not perceiving reality as it is. You're perceiving a highly filtered interpretation, and those filters can be adjusted. The question that will determine your next phase of development is simple but profound. Are you willing to see more, even if what you see transforms everything you thought you knew? The 8 signs are appearing in your awareness right now. Notice them, honor them, develop them. And remember, you're not learning something new. You're remembering what you've always been capable of perceiving.